in what they are supporting or indeed opposing, and therefore the rules apply equally to both sides.
We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day. First Minister.
Later today I will join Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, at the launch of Scotland's Climate Justice Fund. The Scottish Government is providing £3 million for the fund, £1 million per year over the next 3 years, which will support water projects in Malawi, Rwanda, Tanzania and Zambia, increasing some of the world's poorest communities' resilience to the impacts of climate change. I think it is an area where the Chamber will agree that Scotland is providing strong leadership on a hugely important issue, and we call on other industrialised nations to share our ambitions on climate justice.
Joanne Lamont.
And of course we would support Scotland working in partnership in these very, very important issues across the world. On Sunday night on BBC Scotland, the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, assured viewers that an independent Scotland would have a seat on the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. Can the First Minister confirm this? Let us know the details of that agreement, and if it has not been finally signed off, at least tell us when negotiations started.
First Minister. First Minister.
The Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England has 9 members on it. 4 members are appointed by the Treasury. We would expect to be part of the appointments process. There's nothing unusual about that. I mean, in current circumstances, for example, we've just been talking about the climate change issue. The chair of the Committee on Climate Change is jointly appointed at the present moment. In addition, the Treasury has a non-voting observer on the Monetary Policy Committee. We would expect to have the same thing. The current issue is that we have no influence as a country on the Monetary Policy Committee. The Bank of England is an independent central bank. It doesn't take direction on policy, but we should move from a position of having no influence to having proper regard in a sterling area. Now, these are arrangements.
Order. Can we hear the First Minister,
These are
please?
arrangements in place between independent countries. It really requires a remarkable diminished view of Scotland and its position not to believe that we would be entitled to the same representation as other people making the same arrangements would make. And finally, and FISAB, which is a committee which is of one of the Scottish Government at the present moment, we have a UK Treasury observer on FISAB. Why should Joanne Lamont think that any of these things would be unusual for an independent Scotland? And as I have discussed with her before, given that we would be providing some £30,000 million sterling of protection for the UK balance of payments, I think the UK Treasury and the Bank of England would be glad to have us there.
Joanne Lamont. Ms.
Even
Lamont.
by the First Minister's standards, that's an absolutely astonishing response to what was a very simple question. And I think the response to the question was Nicola Sturgeon was wrong when she said that. It is about assertion and belief and hope. But the problem is, of course, the First Minister thinks an independent Scotland would have influence on the Monetary Policy Committee. We don't have influence now, but we will have somehow when Scotland is a foreign country. It does simply beggar belief. Because, of course, crucial to the First Minister's plans to keep the pound after Scotland leaves the United Kingdom is that the Bank of England, and therefore the UK Treasury, agree to being Scotland's lender of last resort. Now, a deal like that would come with a lot of conditions attached. Even clearly, as he hasn't spoken to the Bank of England about the Monetary Policy Committee, can he confirm he has at least spoken to them about being our lender of last resort?
First Minister.
Joanne Lamont reverting to reading her script once again, which indicates that regardless of how I answer her question, she's going to get her head down and read the script. The Scottish Government and myself spoke to the Governor of the Bank of England on the 16th of February, if I remember correctly, but I set out exactly why Nicola Sturgeon's answer was correct. Yeah. It is the case. it is the case that we have no influence at the present moment. Joanne Lamont might remember yesterday's debate when I asked her how many Scottish members are there currently of the Monetary Policy Committee, and I didn't get an answer to that because the answer is zero, nil point, none whatsoever at the present moment. So we have established that we have no influence at the present moment. We have established that the Bank of England operates as an independent central bank, and I've set out how it would be entirely reasonable to see an independent Scotland having the influence that the UK Treasury has at the present moment, and I've pointed out in a range of other areas of key importance, then we have jointly shared arrangements on appointments at the present moment. That seems to me kind of a grown-up attitude to how you conduct government. What it doesn't do or depend on is this peculiarly unionist coalition attitude to the world. This hand-in-glove assumption that a country which was providing, under these circumstances, £30 billion sterling protection to the UK balance of payments would have no influence whatsoever. Why does Joanne Lamont always want to diminish Scotland's abilities and its influence?
Joanne Lamont.
I've always told my children it's not growing up just to cross your fingers and hope for the best. It's not growing up for the First Minister to be incapable to argue for something he has believed for 40 years, never mind a script. He can't answer basic questions about simple economics in an independent Scotland. So, we know he hasn't asked the question about the MPC, he hasn't asked the question about banker of last resort. If the First Minister gets his way, we're fewer than 4 years away from leaving the UK. Yet, on a wing and a prayer, yet on the currency, on our interest rates, on how much we'd be able to spend, how much we could borrow, how much tax we could raise, he has done nothing. He asserts that an independent Scotland could rely on the Bank of England, but he hasn't even asked them. It's just meaningless assertion after meaningless assertion. If he wants the Bank of England to back a separate Scotland, why doesn't he at least ask them what they're willing to do?
First Minister.
I'm answering and giving an explanation of what I believe the position would be. I'm not responsible for Joanne Lamont not being able to ask the right questions. I'm answering questions as being able to. I've set out the context of monetary policy and how it's administered. I've set out the shape of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. I've pointed out to Joanne Lamont that the Bank of England has been an independent bank since 1997 to give it freedom from political determination. I've set out the reasons why it wouldn't just be to Scotland's advantage but to the rest of the UK's advantage to have the sterling zone that we propose. If I could... Sterling zone is a matter which is well understood in terms of currencies and politics. I don't know why the Labour Party should find such a simple explanation. So it's revealing about the Labour Party's attitude. The advantage for Scotland would be it's a reasonable proposition in the current circumstances to see it to Scotland's advantage to have the sterling zone. It's of substantial advantage to the rest of the United Kingdom because of the protection that Scottish resources will give the balance of payments. Now, under these circumstances, why is that not a proposition that we should put to the Scottish people? As Joanne Lamont knows, we publish a white paper next year given the independence proposition, and I'll be delighted to take her forecast on the timescale for Scottish independence. Whether she should throw in the deck at this stage or whether she should wait for the 4 years, 4 years sounds fine to me, and I think it will sound fine to the people of Scotland.
I didn't realise that there was a right question I could ask the First Minister, given that the only right question his backbench is allowed to ask is, just how good are you, First Minister? This is a serious issue. And given the response today from the First Minister, no wonder the First Minister flopped at the box office last Friday. No wonder his deputy bombed on the TV on Sunday night. And no wonder this week some of supporters have started backing away from independence. If he is going to put the country through another 2.5 years of this constitutional quagmire, he at least could do some work so his words had some meaning. When will the First Minister realise that just because he says something doesn't make it true?
First Minister.
The proposition we put forward in the White Paper next year, the timescale for the referendum that we've set out. I am interested in Jan Lamott's belief that the independence campaign will like the strength and vigour of the Tory-Labour alliance which is going to be put forward against it. The Secret Six who met in Alistair Darling's home. When I was a child, occasionally I read Ian Blyton's books on the Secret Seven, so no doubt the Secret Six is something very similar. I think the Labour-Tory alliance, constrained against independence, which we see so well displayed in this chamber, will be limited in numbers, limited in enthusiasm, but above all limited in its ambition that it has for the people of Scotland. I know that Jan Lamont these days is taking to speak on behalf of the people of Scotland.
She wishes.
Maybe she should just go through the precaution of trying to get herself elected first before she takes on that presumption.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans in the near future, and I don't think I can match the number of meetings between the Prime Minister and Tony Blair, which seem to be extensive.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I'm not sure if I've asked in advance, First Minister, if this is the right question, but I'm going to be old-fashioned and press on anyway. 3 weeks ago, I asked the First Minister about Northern Irish pupils using Irish passports to receive free tuition at Scottish universities. And at his high-handed and patronising best, the First Minister told me that there was no evidence of any serious difficulty. Well, as we know, where the First Minister leads, the Education Secretary is only too eager to follow. And this week, in a letter to my colleague Liz Smith, he too was magisterially dismissive of legitimate concerns. Refusing to make a statement to Parliament, he said, "Doing so may risk attaching a level of importance to this that is out of proportion with experience on the ground." Well, Presiding Officer, the evidence does exist. Figures have emerged from Dundee University showing that almost a quarter of the more than 1,500 applicants from Northern Ireland used an Irish passport, with a potential cost to Dundee alone of more than £14 million. So will the First Minister now admit this is a real problem, and will he instruct his Education Secretary to sort it out?
First Minister.
Can I point out that there's nothing new in the principle of this arrangement. It's been in place for many, many years because of the totally misguided attempt by the United Kingdom government to impose tuition fees and the necessities of European law and regulation. Ruth Davidson does herself an injustice after she had made the last point to me. I took the trouble and time to go and check exactly on the figures, and of course we've now got the benefit of the final UCAS figures for applications for this year. So I went to these figures and I looked for this flood, an overwhelming influence of Northern Irish students, because the figures are done by domicile, of course, who must apparently be flooding into the country in order to justify Ruth Davidson's fears. And what I found was that in 2011-12, the number of applications from non-Irish domicile students, that means non-Irish, whether they're Irish citizenship or joint citizenship, dual citizenship or whatever, was 6,131. This year, after Ruth Davidson's flood of applications, which is causing us so much concern, the number was 5,211. A decline of 15%. even greater than the disastrous decline of English students applying to English universities in the face of the Tory Liberal tuition fees, which was 10%. Now we have the final figures, with Ruth Davidson clear to reorientate herself in her dire predictions of a flood of Northern Irish students when the applications are actually down by 15%.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding officer, giving us the broad brush yet again, but not looking at the detail. How many of the domiciles were applying under an Irish passport? That is the question that the First Minister has to answer, as he is yet again running off to shore up his flailing Education Secretary. But what's interesting about Mike Russell's letter, is that he kind of contradicts himself, and it comes down to this idea of domicile and residency. Because there is a boast in this letter where Mike Russell says that he's absolutely clear that domicile is the deciding criteria. But the next sentence he contradicts himself by saying that those with dual nationality get to choose. So again, we come back to domicile, nationality or residency. Our universities and students are desperate for clarity, which Mike Russell says in this letter he's going to hope to come up for next year, but not this year. So will the First Minister break the habit of a lifetime, admit this is a total Horlicks, step in, sort it out and give our universities clarity now?
First Minister.
I mean, that was so bad it didn't even get cheers from the Labour benches. I mean, can I just add in all seriousness, how can it be broad brush when I've identified the numbers to the nearest one? Can I just repeat them to Ruth Davidson? Last year, total applications from Northern Ireland residency, that is, whether they've got Irish citizenship or not, was 6,131. This year it's come in at 5,211. That's not broad brush, that's exact detail, which allows us to quantify the extent of the problem that Ruth Davidson assured us a few weeks ago was flooding in to Scottish universities. They're not desperate. It's the Conservative Party in Scotland who are desperate, as it happens. But I was looking again, because I'm becoming quite addicted, to posts in the web by Jim Terrace, the current chairman of Selkirk Conservative and Unionist Club. He said of last week's efforts, had nobody prepared Ruth for the likely reply that Alex Salmond would give. He then went on to say it was almost as bad as a Joanne Lamont effort that elicited groans from the Chamber for being so politically inept and twee. It seems this Tory-Labour alliance has got some way to run before it's going to prevent a threat to the Scottish people's ascent to independence.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Next meeting of the Cabinet discuss issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Will O'Reilly.
This week the First Minister's bulldozer came charging back out of the garage. This time the Justice Committee ramming through police centralisation, crushing amendment after amendment. But what's next? What's next in the bulldozer's path? Perhaps emergency control rooms. Can the First Minister guarantee me that he won't close local police and fire emergency control rooms?
First Minister.
I'm still trying to work out this bulldozer thing, but all I suppose the most recent bulldozer, I suppose, was the Scottish local government elections, where, if I remember correctly, the Liberal Democrats, the length and breadth for the country, as they'd done in last year's Scottish parliamentary elections, made this the very centre point of their campaign, spreading gloom, doom and despondency around Scotland and saying that police and fire, as a central Scottish service, wouldn't work for local communities. The only unfortunate thing, the only bulldozer was in operation, was the bulldozer that the Scottish people lumped over the Liberal Democrat Party.
So no answer. Absolutely no answer. He stood there before boasting about the big numbers his centralisation plans will save. And we should not forget that in his own consultation, In his own consultation, his plans were rejected by 2 to 1. So don't give me any of that tosh about the public supporting his plans for centralisation. The truth is, his changes will cost, not save money, which is why these control rooms are under threat. People at the Police Federation think emergency control rooms will close. And a chief fire officer told Radio Scotland only a couple of weeks ago he believed closures were on the way. When will this decision be made? People rely on control rooms at Thornton, Dundee, Inverness, Aberdeen, Govan and so many more. When will they be told their fate?
First Minister.
Well, the programme of both police and fire reform continues on timetable. We've made the point in terms of local accountability that we think within the Scottish structure you can actually improve local accountability. But I was very struck by his mention of the situation both north of the border and south of the border between England and Scotland. I would have thought the differences are this, that in Scotland that's the country where police numbers are increasing, which are 1,000 up on where they were in 2007. England is a country where police numbers are collapsing thanks to the policies of the Tory and Liberal administration. And of course that's exemplified by the respective police federations in both countries. When Kenny McCaskill, as Justice Secretary, went in the last few weeks to the Scottish Police Federation, he got a standing ovation. When Theresa May, as the Home Secretary, the representative of the Liberal and Conservative government, went to the Police Federation in England, she got a slow hand clap. That's the difference between the confidence that the forces have in Scotland and our policies and the total lack of confidence in the Tory Liberal coalition.
To ask the First Minister, in the light of the economic impact on the area, what representations the Scottish Government is making to the UK Government regarding the transition of RAF Lucas to an army base.
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government has made strong representations to the UK Government seeking clarity in their future plans for RAF Lucas. The Cabinet Secretary for Parliamentary Business has written repeatedly to the Secretary of State for Defence, setting out our continued concerns and calling for a meeting with UK Ministers to discuss the defence transformation issues affecting Scotland. The Minister of State for the Armed Forces has now agreed to that meeting, and I understand it will take place on the 14th of June.
Roderick Campbell.
I welcome the First Minister's answer. It's almost a year since the Secretary of State for Defence announced the closure of RAF Lucas, but we have had no further details of the transition to an army base. So I welcome indeed the First Minister's statement in that respect. As the First Minister will appreciate, the community as a whole has been extremely perturbed by the absence of information, and anything the First Minister can do to provide that information will undoubtedly be greatly appreciated.
First Minister.
Well, I can absolutely give that assurance. In the contacts we've had with the UK Government in this matter, we have consistently made exactly the point about the risks that Roger Campbell identifies. At his meeting with the Minister of State, I know the Cabinet Secretary will vigorously reinforce that message. The Scottish Government has been clear throughout the process that we will work with all concerned to bring about the best result we can in circumstances for service personnel, their families and the communities like Lucas that have so proudly hosted them for so many generations.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. The First Minister said previously that an independent Scotland would have just one airbase. Would that one airbase be at Lucas or elsewhere?
First Minister.
Well, the inheritance that we will come with, according to the Defence Review, was set out by Liam Fox when he was Defence Secretary. Of course, we thought that was the proposition that we would inherit. Since then, the latest Defence Secretary has cast some doubt about key aspects of that, not least of which the designation and cap badges of the Scottish regiments. So I shall make an arrangement with Murdo Fraser. If he can find out from his colleague in London what exactly the latest review of the Defence Review means for Scotland, then I'll be able to answer his questions comprehensively.
Question number 5, Richard Simpson.
To ask the First Minister whether the 48-hour waiting time target for access to a GP or relevant healthcare professional is being met across Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, the Patient Experience Survey of JP and local NHS services for 2011-12 was published this week, and it showed that 92.6% of patients were offered the opportunity to see or speak to a doctor or nurse within 48 hours, above our target of 90%. 85% of patients were able to see or speak to a doctor or nurse within 2 working days. 8% were offered an appointment, but the person they wanted to see was not available or the time was not convenient.
Richard Simpson.
The Sunday Post, of course, ran a very interesting front page this week. And I thank him for his response, but is he really telling this Parliament that we should be confident in the patient experience survey, which covered fewer than 2% of patients, had an even lower response rate to the specific question of the 48-hour target? And if he's saying that we should be confident, which he really shouldn't, then is he pleased that 1 in 5 practices are still below 90% for the 48-hour access, some as low as 72%? So will the First Minister now invite the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary to stop focusing on independence, start discussions with the BMA and the Royal Colleges, so that practices which are not meeting the target are identified and challenged, but are also supported, since many GPs are finding the pressures and demands increasing year on year?
First Minister.
Can I say why we... And I know that Richard Simpson wasn't in the Parliament, neither was I before 2007, but let me tell Richard Simpson exactly why we should have confidence in the patient experience survey. If he might check, I'm sure he will after this question time, that in 2006-07 it was actually up to GPs to declare to NHS Board their compliance with the 40-hour patient access. We changed that, this government changed that, in 2008-09 to introduce the patient experience survey so that we could actually find out how the people thought of how well they could access their GP or relevant healthcare professional. In other words, it was changed from being a survey under the Labour Liberal administration, where it was up to the GPs to put in the returns, to one which is a genuine patient survey. And patient satisfaction on that genuine patient survey has improved from 89% in 2008-09 to almost 93% this year. I'm sure these figures were on the very fingertips of Richard Simpson, and he was about to quote them in all fairness in his questions. That's why we can have confidence in the survey. We see an improving situation under the most difficult circumstances. And in general terms, when we've got reason to do so, we should give every support as a Parliament to our National Health Service and those who practice within it.
Question number 6, Alec Johnson.
To ask the First Minister how many 18 to 24-year-olds started their own businesses in Scotland last year and how this compares with England and Wales.
First Minister.
Well, there's some interesting new business registration statistics from the ONS show that there were 15,530 business start-ups in Scotland in 2010, which was up 5.5% on 2009. That compared to a decrease in England of almost 1%, a decrease in Wales of almost 10% in the same period. The measure of business registrations is not available under that survey by age group. However, evidence from the 2010 Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which Strathclyde University conduct, shows that 6% of those aged 18 to 24 years in Scotland were engaged in early-stage entrepreneurial activity. This compares to a rate of under 3% in England. Support and advice for people of all ages looking to start up in business in Scotland is made available through the Business Gateway. Alongside Business Gateway, of course, the Prince's Youth Business Trust provides advice, financial support and after-care service to young people aged between 18 and 25 who wish to set up business.
Alex Johnson.
The First Minister will be aware that on Monday of this week the private sector funded £82.5 million business start-up loan scheme was established in England. Does the First Minister believe that he has already covered this responsibility in Scotland, or whether it is necessary for additional resources to be gathered and used effectively to ensure that young Scots, businessmen and women, have the opportunity to establish themselves in business in years to come?
First Minister.
I have to say to Alec Johnson, I saw the report and the suggestion that seemed to be made of that this was private sector funding. My understanding now is it's not private sector funding, although a number of private companies are facilitating the process of the loan scheme going out. It has been done, as I understand it, at this moment, and I'll certainly correct to him if this is not the case, because I've been looking for information on this for the last couple of days, and it hasn't been immediately forthcoming, if I can put it as gently as that. It sounds like it's now been done as a pilot scheme funded from within the UK government departments. I'm kind of suspicious of that, because, as he probably knows, that pilot schemes can be non-barneted. And this is a scheme for only England. Now, I hope I'll get the support of the whole chamber if I find out this is actually government money which is being deployed in what seems to me a very interesting scheme. But I hope the whole chamber will support that Barnett consequentials will flow to both Scotland, Wales and indeed Northern Ireland. So we're going to find out exactly where the funds came from. If it is public money, then it certainly should be barnetted, and they shouldn't use the idea of a trial as a means of not applying the correct funding mechanisms. But I shall write to Alec Johnson when I've got more detail on the matter. In terms of the substance, I think we should understand that the Prince's Youth Business Trust Scotland does invaluable work exactly in this space at the present moment. And when the Parliament has the upcoming conference on enterprise business in the Parliament, then I can tell Alec Johnson I'll be making an announcement very specific to that fund and how we can provide further government support for young people in Scotland anxious to become entrepreneurs. I'm sorry I can't give a more explicit indication of what that announcement will be, but I surely understand that I should really make it to the Business and the Parliament Conference. But you can look forward with anticipation to that day.
I know that members will wish to join me in welcoming Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who joined us in the gallery during First Minister's questions. I now suspend business until 2:15.